Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. One thing I have realized and been humbled by over the last 2+ years is the opportunity that has been given to me to gain knowledge and wisdom from musicians, with the caveat that I can share their tales with people in all parts of the world via the internet. Call it mass distance education, if you will. I have the opportunity to talk to individuals who have been on this earth longer than myself, have experienced societal shifts, and have invented and reinvented themselves in different musical settings in different parts of the country. Thankfully, when the record business was actually an industry, these artists had an opportunity to gain name recognition through their work as accompanists and leaders by weaving within many different musical styles. My guest today is a veritable spring chicken. Born in 1922, he plays his guitar with a slick crispness that has lent itself to stage and screen, Dixieland, country blues, cool West bop, and funky old Mississippi burning sound that has translated into legions of fans and admirers throughout the world. He had a deep personal and professional relationship with Bird, Charlie Parker, contributed to great vocal jazz artists like Carmen McRae and Sarah Vaughan, and played with all the heavyweights on both coasts, Richie Kamuka, Roger Kellaway, Benny Carter, Donald Bailey, Jimmy Rolls, and Cal Tjader, to name a few. From Laurel, Mississippi to New Orleans to the Big Apple to the West Coast, Mundell, Lowe, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you.
You know, I wanted to start by asking, could you describe for my audience the regional music of Mississippi?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, Jake, it was country music, and there was no electric stuff, of course, so everything was acoustic, which meant that my grandfather played fiddle, and my sister played guitar, and she's the one that got me started with the guitar, and an uncle who played guitar and another who played the mandolin. My dad was a fiddle player too, so I grew up until I was 16, I suppose, in that atmosphere. And then I discovered that there were other kinds of music that I was more interested in, so that went forward from there.
Did you ever have a chance to, did Bill Monroe ever come through your town?
No, I didn't meet Bill until years and years later. We did a festival together up here in California, and I finally got to see him in person. He was quite a character and a good mandolin player too.
Yeah, well, I only bring it up because I've never really spent a lot of time in Mississippi, but it's a Gulf Coast state, and and I know it's not that far away from bluegrass, and I just feel that when you say country, I have to believe there's also a bluegrass element to the music there. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think the bluegrass thing was a little north of where I was.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard that expression until much later, when people started to record and fellows who speak on the radio like you started using that terminology. So I'm not really too knowledgeable about the bluegrass, so to speak.
Yeah, no. What I love the most about artists like yourself is that you didn't grow up with idioms, and you don't get caught up with idioms. No. Idioms have really stifled creative music in a lot of ways, but you have really covered all the bases, and whether it was subconscious or unconscious or not. You were playing all these different idioms. But, Mundell, what was some of the... I guess what I'm trying to get at is, there were these... And you can even elaborate more about when you went to New Orleans with Dixieland, but, you had... these pockets of regional activity, and I'm trying to think about when you're growing up in the 30s, late 30s, and it's Depression era. We're in the midst of possibly going off to war, eventually going to war, World War II. And I'm looking around. I'm trying to think what was the town like as far as like What kind of music were you exposed to? Was there a lot of live music? Was there music coming out of stores? Were you just kind of playing at your home? Who were you exposed to early on? What were those influences?
Well, once I left Mississippi and kind of wound up hanging out in New Orleans, excuse me, there was the Dixieland element, of course, but there was a nice swing element that was going on too, and that's what I was attracted to. For instance, the first little band I ever heard. Hang on a minute, Jake. I got to throw a frog.
No problem.
Was on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, in a place called the Open Door, and it stayed open 24 hours. And in that, there was a group that played a black band, the Famous Brothers, and as a matter of fact, a few years ago I went down and I saw Famous Lambert, the leader of it, just before he passed away. But they're the ones that really were attracted to me because of the nice, easy swing that they had were starting. That was kind of on the beginning of the whole swing thing with Benny Goodman and all those people. But my education was really in New Orleans about what the kind of music I wanted to get involved in. Mm-hmm. And sheer curiosity led from one thing to another. And so it's been a great ride.
Well, no, I guess what I'm getting at when you say swing, I'm very much a proponent and a believer that the African slave trade, those guys that came up from the islands, brought that swing element to the Americas. It was the African rhythm.
No, I think, Jake, I've had conversations about this, and my feeling is that the rhythmic element was added by the blacks that came up the route you just discussed.
Sure.
But I think the musical part of it really came from England, because there's a lot of jazz that has the forms of music that folk songs that came from England. So I think somewhere in the middle of there, everything kind of melded together, and what you have is jazz.
What were those those brothers? Correct. Tell me their names again. The Famous Brothers.
Famous. No, the name was Lambert. The leader's name was Famous Lambert.
The Lambert brothers. Did they just like the kind of loose? I don't want to use the word. I mean, like that funky guitar sound that you brought. What was it that? No.
It was the nice, easy swing that was just starting up in those days. It's hard to describe. I would have to point it out musically to you, but it had nothing to do with country music and rock and roll and all that crap, which came later.
Right.
It was a kind of the feeling was, you've seen these old fellas that are sitting around playing the guitar, singing the blues. Mm-hmm. Well, that was the feeling of the music, but it wasn't really all blues. It was part blues and it was part something else. So it kind of went from there into what we call swing, and then from there, at the end of the war, of course, Dizzy and Burns started this thing called bebop, which was really a growth out of the swing thing, musically and harmonically. So it was logically the next step for music to take, and they took it.
Wow, we're talking to Mundell Lowe, who had literally a bird's eye view into this. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's the thing, is that if I was with you, you could explain it to me or play music, But it's that idea of saying, okay, we have the Dixieland element, or we had this, and then all of a sudden this swing. It was the blues, but it was something else, and that something else.
It was the next step up the ladder for the growth of jazz is really what it was. A lot of players back in those days poo-pooed it and said, oh, that'll go away in some time. They weren't smart enough musically, or maybe intelligently enough, to realize that was the coming thing, and that was the growth of out of swing into something else. And they're still trying to find the next step out of bebop, because it's still around. It'll be around because Bird and Diz made such an impression on the world. So they use things that we had never thought of in the swing thing. Like musical extensions, harmonic progressions, passing chords. Melodic, in that kind of music, there's no such thing as a bad note. It depends on where you're coming from musically and going to the next note. So right. They realized that, and they put that together, the two of them, once Bird got to New York, and it's the rest is history.
You spent time with Betty Goodman. Is that when you first met Betty Goodman down in New Orleans?
No. I met Benny when I got out of World War II. See, I went through World War II. Went out to the Pacific. I was in Guadalcanal and all that mess up to the Philippines, and finally got home. And when I got home, I had met a fellow in the Army named John Hammond, who was Benny Goodman's brother-in-law. And we kind of liked each other because he was shouting about jazz in those days, and I was trying to understand it. And when I got home, I sent him a telegram back to New Orleans. I sent him a telegram saying, "Just discharged, Merry Christmas." And the next thing I know, he and Ray McKinley called me and said, "Ray is putting together a band. Are you interested in coming to New York and joining the band?" So I jumped at that little tidbit. Wow. And I stayed with Mac for about a year and a half, and I went from there to Benny. And I worked for Benny like 3 or 4 times. He fired me a couple of times, and I quit once or twice or something like that, because he was a little difficult to get along with, as you probably know from all the stories from all the musicians.
Well, actually, what's really fascinating, Mundell, is that this is sort of, to me, a very this is such an opportunity for education for me, because I this is not an area of expertise by any stretch. There's a lot. Going back to John Hammond, was he actually part of the Columbia record production at some point as well?
That became later. I met him, he was just a private in the Army. He came from, his grandmother was Lady Vanderbilt. Wow. So he had the wherewithal to do a lot of things, but he was the kind of a guy that he wanted to see the right thing done. He had an idea about jazz and the sound of jazz, and he spent his money and his effort trying to put it together. The way the whole thing started with the relationship between the two of us rather, was that we were kind of in the same outfit, and the enlisted men's club on Saturday afternoon, he would put together these jam sessions. And interesting enough, it was for blacks and whites. And in those days, that was a kind of a tender subject, as you know. But we got together. I met a lot of the guys that later on in New York I teamed up with or met again. And then I went from there to Camp Stoneman in San Francisco, and from there to Guadalcanal. So we lost contacts there for a minute. The next thing I knew, a package arrived to me in the mail on Guadalcanal, and of the Esquire Jazz book, and he had written an article about me, which helped a hell of a lot, for a young guy out there looking to not quite knowing what to do when the war was over. But when I got back, then that article and his teaming up with Ray McKinley, suddenly everything kind of came together, and I'm glad it did, because I was right in the middle of it.
Let me ask you, what kind of feelings did you have? What kind of excitement did you have knowing that you were one of the first guys to do crossover music with, before desegregation of the Army, having one of these mixed clubs and being able to play with guys that when you realize, you're like, wow, these guys are bringing a whole new element to the table. What was that feeling like?
Jake, let me tell you the truth. We were just trying to pay the rent.
Thank you for your honesty. No, I appreciate it.
You have to understand that history is only made after people write about it.
Right.
Not before, but after people write about it, then it becomes history. Well, the same thing with kind of the way I came up. For years, when I first got to New York, and when I left Benny for a while and was kind of freelancing around New York, I did a lot of recording with black combinations and black bands, to the point where when I came out to the coast, most people thought I was a black guitar player. But I enjoyed that because I was accepted musically and socially by these people, and I accepted them, even though I had been brought up in Mississippi. I was lucky enough to have a grandfather that kind of raised me, that had a very, very healthy look about the social structure in this country, and he would have no part of that you was black and I'm white thing. So I had a wonderful education, which set me up for the rest of my life, understanding and dealing with people.
Yeah, that's actually imperative because you could have wound up with a different type of Southern family that would have instilled a lot of hatred in you, and taken it in a different. That's when you were in New York. Can you talk a little bit about some of the bands, some of these black bands that you were in?
Well, those days they would just throw up a recording session for. I worked with Rabbit, with Ellington. What was his name? Rabbit, the alto saxophone player.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hodges. Johnny Hodges.
Okay.
Yeah, I did a couple of albums with him. I can't. It's been so long, Jake. I can't remember specifically the people that I played with. There was a guy who called himself the Professor. He was a black band leader. I did a lot of recording with him. I recorded with Mary Lou Williams, and then later on, I got to record with Bud, with Charlie Parker and Lester and all those people, Billie Holiday. So I've always been drawn to that side of jazz. I didn't like the stiff rhythm sections that a lot of the white bands had. I loved the sound of a good rhythm section, of black players, because they understood that whole thing about swing more than the white people did. They really did.
Why did they know more?
Because that came out of their background, not ours. We only anyway, the way I see it, I think the jazz thing was kind of a bleed over from the black community into the white, and then the white got to the point where they were pretty good with it. People like Benny Goodman, Harry James, Artie Shaw, people like that, and so we learned from each other is what I'm trying to say. But that's the way jazz is anyway. There's really no way of teaching jazz, even though they try to do it in the schools and the conservatories and all of that. And I admire them for trying, but there's no way of doing it. The only way you do that is to get in a band, get out on the road, take your hard knocks, do whatever you have to do, but learn your art, learn your craft.
Do you I think it's a profound statement. It's, just for the record, I'm going to be turning 35 in a couple of weeks, so I'm just a young father, young guy in society trying to paint, be a journalist and go back. And what you're saying is kind of what I've heard from other guys like Lou Tabakin and people that really they're not really big fans of mass schooling and education within the confines of a classroom. And
the problem is, Jake, that many of these teachers, God bless them, don't know what they're doing as far as teaching jazz. There is really no way of teaching jazz unless you get a kid in the room, you sit him down, let's say guitar, and you say to him, now you watch what I'm going to do, and I want you to do what I'm doing after you see me do it. And it's monkey see, monkey do, really, all the way. That's the only way that I learned jazz, and that's the only way that I know of doing it.
Right, and talk about, because I've been preaching for the last 2 years about experiential learning, the idea of being up there with Billie Holiday and maybe flubbing a line, but ultimately communicating and listening on the bandstand, as opposed to I think, but one of the issues is there's a supply and demand issue, Mundell, in the sense that we're producing all these technically proficient players, and yet they don't have a place to play where they can feel more comfortable just being themselves.
That's why a lot of them turn to teaching music. It's just it's a shame what's happened in this country as far as art is concerned. Art has been taken over by a thing called business, and when you put the two together, business will out every time.
How in your formative years, especially when you got to New York, business has always been part of our system. I mean, whatever system, however you define it, whether it's pseudo-capitalism, capitalism, whatever it is, how was there more of a balance, and how did it show in your own career when art was treated as art?
When I first got out of the Army and went to New York, it was more on the artistic side. When rock and roll started to come in, and these producers saw a way to make money, that's when the scale started to change, right there. And I'm guilty of being in on the beginning of it, because I did a lot of those dates myself with all those vocal groups from New Jersey and whatever. It's just. But I had a young family. I had to feed them.
Right, but
so I did it.
But what you said was very profound, because I agree with you. I mean, where business has taken over art, and if it becomes a bottom line thing about money, then you're not going to have the sophistication or the overlap or the just the beautiful colors that can come out of, especially music. And
well, you see, the way I see it anyway is that these producers have latched on to the kids. They don't care about the older crowd anymore, because the kids are the ones that buy records. So they gear everything to their attention, and they make it very attractive. So the kids go out and they buy that. That's why thousands show up at these rock and roll concerts. And it's, what it is, Jake? It's a return to vaudeville. That's exactly what it is. Has nothing to do with music necessarily. It has to do with showmanship and getting on stage with the fireworks and all that crap. And it's a shame, because there are a lot of us in this world who know, or think they know anyway, that music, the right kind of music, is the only art that we produce in this country. Everything else was brought from Europe.
But like I said in my opening, the other issue is just the idea that Mundell Lowe received an identity, because there was commerce based in the music industry, and there are photographs and liner notes from Harry Lynn and records that I find in thrift stores by Gene Bianco with the Mundell Lowe Quartet. So all of a sudden, you're starting to read about Mundell Lowe, and you're seeing all these albums you put out. And nowadays, somebody can just go onto iTunes, buy one song off an album for 99 cents. You don't have to, so there's anonymity. People don't even know what they're listening to or who they're listening to. There's an identity crisis, really. And I guess that and the pop and circumstance of what's so interesting, you mentioned vaudeville. I keep talking about vaudeville as a way of where, it was showmanship music, and then you had guys like,
That's right.
Then you had Basie and Bird and people that, in my mind, were playing music that was basically, they were saying to the audience, hey, we're going to play what we want to play, and you can decide if you like it or not, but we're not going to play to please you. We're not going to play to entertain you. We're going to we're going to burn, and you can judge whether you want to like it or not.
Well, a lot of the reason, one of the biggest reasons why keep running into my name is because I've been around for such a long time. In April I'll be 91 years old.
Bless you, brother. Bless you, man.
And I'm still out there kicking and doing what my ears like, and hopefully what other people who come to hear me like.
Well, you're sharp. You're sharp, man. I mean, I mean, you're not missing a beat in this conversation. I wanted to focus a little bit on the venerable and unsung sort of San Diego scene. I look at guys like Bob Magnuson, who played a lot with Joe Farrell, and the great drummer John Guerin, and his boyhood buddy Mike Wolford, and I know Charles McPherson, I believe, lives down there now. But,
that's right.
L.A. and the North Bay scene get all the attention in California, but why don't you talk a little bit about San Diego, because I don't want them to get left out of the mix, especially with Mundell living down there.
Yeah, I don't really know why jazz down here is. There are a few people who are trying desperately to build it up.
Right.
The guy that owns Dizzy's, for instance, he doesn't make a lot of money, but he keeps jazz alive. And there are a couple of other people like that. And I've noticed now in the last couple of years that there's more activity jazz-wise down here than there was before. But when I first came down here, jazz was kind of an ugly word. I don't know why. I can't tell you why, but hang on a minute. I'm just getting over a cold, and I've still got the hackers.
Don't worry about it.
Anyway, but I don't work as much as I would like to. But a lot of that is that people will think that I'm probably dead or something, But I stay on the computer and let people know that I'm alive, and I'm interested if they are. So that's all I can do.
Well, I was going to say I took my family out for a long weekend to Carlsbad, and I wound up in San Diego at a new record shop called Groovy Records, and I'm in there. And there's a guy that I recognize from a record show here in Tucson, and we were talking about, the old school cats that are still playing. And he goes, Mundell Lowe lives here. I said, what are you talking about? He's still here. And then, because I mean, and I look you up, I'm like, really, Mundell, the truth is my ear has become very, I've been able to become more well-rounded in my listening. But when I first started really exploring jazz, or what made sense to me, it was, ironically enough, the famous Door label that really got me into jazz. And one of the guys was Mundell Lowe. I mean, some of the stuff, it wasn't overly flashy. It was just, it was tight, and it swung really hard, and it was the epitome, even though it was done in, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of that stuff was done in the 70s. But I look at that stuff and I hear it and I say, boy, these guys had their chops together. And it wasn't avant-garde, it wasn't Cecil Taylor, it wasn't anything like that. But it really, it's funny. I go back to it now and listen to it, and I say, boy, this is really what got me on that train. And Harry Lynn really was kind of an innovator in his own way.
Yeah, I met Harry in New York. He worked in the record department in a record as a salesman in one of the record stores right there on Broadway and 49th Street. I can't remember what the store was called. Colonial Records, I think it was called. And we started talking, and then later on, after I moved out to the coast, he called me up and he says, I have a small label. You want to do an album? And then I said, of course. Then Then I called up Jimmy Lowe to do part of it, and I called up, what the hell's his name?
Donald Bailey on drums, and Monty Budwig, too.
Monty Budwig was there, yeah. And I tell you, sometimes at this age, I float out and in a little bit. I can't remember the other piano player on that album.
Oh, Roger Kellaway. Roger Kellaway was on that album.
Roger Kellaway, of course. Thank you. I used Roger on one side and Jimmy on the other side. I don't know why; it just worked out that way. But that was a nice little album.
You know, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you that every year there's a Mundell Lowe Appreciation Day in Mississippi. Is that true?
In Laurel, yes.
Talk about how did that come about?
Well, the mayor, Melvin Mack, M-A-C-K, was the mayor down there, and he and a friend decided that they would like to have me come back and make it Mundell Lowe Day and do a concert and get the newspapers involved and all that stuff, and they did, and it turned out beautifully. So on my birthday, every year down there, they set aside at least a part of the day as a Mundell Lowe Day, which I appreciate. But that's kind of on my hometown where I was born in Laurel.
You know, I wonder if I don't know much about Laurel or Mississippi in general, but do you get a chance to go back there and play it at all? Have you gone back there recently to play?
Not too much. I tell you, at this age, traveling is just a little bit. I don't have the energy level, Jake, that I used to have, so I have to be careful where I use that energy.
It's very wise. It's very wise, actually.
Yeah, but in May, I'm supposed to go to Vienna, in Austria, and Graz, and down through Germany a little bit, and I've got a fella in Boston, Mike McNally, who is an agent, and he's put the whole thing together, and all I have to do is show up and grin and play the guitar, so we're going to try to see if we can do it.
Is it going to be solo, or are you going to have a band with you?
No, Mike is also a wonderful guitarist himself. So we pick up a bass player and a drummer over there, and we have a guitar quartet.
Oh.
And we did this a couple of times before, and it worked out very well. So we'll fly into Vienna and do a couple of nights there, and then have a day off, and then go down to Graz, do that, and come back and have a day off, and then from there we'll go down into Germany, Nyberg, and a couple of other places down there, and then back to Vienna and come home. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm saying you're saving up that tank of energy for that's a haul right there. That's going to be a good time.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's nice. You know, we travel around on the train when we're over there. We don't fly too much, which I like because I like seeing the countryside, and I'm kind of a history nut anyway. So I get to see a lot of history with the old castles and all that stuff, and talk to the people about things that have gone on in the past. You know, that kind of thing.
Can you just touch quickly on what you think is separating the music as far? Can you talk about Charlie Parker, the person you knew?
Person I knew was a wonderful man. Unfortunately, he had an accident with broken legs or something when he was a kid, and his mother was a nurse, and she was a special nurse. So rather than see him suffer, she brought medication home, and it would ease the pain. So he got used to that feeling, and that was that. When Bird used to hang out with us, I roomed for a while in New York with a fellow named Tony Scott, clarinet player, and he was a friend of Bird. He introduced us. Bird would come over to the house, and we would talk about mathematics. We'd talk about chemistry, all kinds of things. We never talked about music. Never.
Wow.
And when we got on the stand, musically, we talked about music. Kind of silly, but that's
he was really a very educated guy, and you could talk.
He was indeed. Yeah, he was extremely very bright, night, and very. The first gig I played with him was at a place in Harlem called Rockland Palace, and it was when he came out with the strings, Charlie Parker with strings.
Mm-hmm.
He only had 8 arrangements because it was a 10-inch album, and that's all it had room for. So he hired a quartet or a quintet or something, including me, to play between the string arrangements. In other words, the strings would play, and then we'd play a couple.
Oh, I would love to. So these are, and what? Do you have any idea what? Again, I know what label did it come? Was it Charlie Parker Records or what?
Yeah, it came out later called Bird is Free. You can get it.
It's on 10-inch.
No, you can get it on probably on CD now, but it originally came out on 10-inch. No, it was a regular LP.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Tony Scott because that's another cat. Has he left us now?
Yes, he did. He had to go a couple of years ago. Yeah, we were great friends for a long time. I thought he was a masterful clarinet player.
He's another one of the guys like Mundell and that was instrumental in taking that instrument outside of course, the jazz context, playing it in meditation music and yoga meditation and doing all sorts of hard East Coast stuff. I mean, the guy, to me, put me back in time with a pot of coffee with Mundell and Tony Scott in an apartment in New York. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. He also introduced me to Billie Holiday. And I wound up doing some recording with Billie, and we also did a Broadway show called Holiday on Broadway. So Tony, he also introduced me to Lester Young. He knew all of these people, and because they'd kind of grown up together, and so he was a great friend and a great roommate. So I'm sorry he's gone because he was worthwhile.
Who are some of your? I mean, Mundell, you are. I did talk to Chico Hamilton, although he could only really give me about 15 minutes. And who from your generation are you still in touch with, and who is still out there that's still gigging like you?
Joe Wilder.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble is, baby, most of them are gone.
How about Jack Costanza?
Who?
Mr. Bongo. Jack Costanza.
Oh, Jack is out here, but I didn't really ever know Jack. I met him. I was working in the Commodore Hotel when he came through there with Stan Kitten years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know him, and we've never worked together. So.
You know, I was going to say, because for me, this is extremely important to be able to, talk to you guys and get you on the record, while you're still playing and still very cogent. I read a story somewhere that you actually discovered or introduced Bill Evans to Bill Gower from Riverside. Is that true?
That's true. When I came back from World War II, my then wife and child were living in a place called Hammond, Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. So her brother, my wife's brother, said, "There's a guy, a piano player out at the college here, Southeastern, that you really ought to hear." So he took me out there, and we walked into this hall. It was a concert band playing. And who was playing first flute? Bill Evans.
Flute.
So when they had a break, Raymond knew him, and he introduced us, and we went to one of those little rehearsal halls at little cubicles, And I said, "Play me something." So he played a couple of things, and I thought, this guy can hear. He really knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. So I said to him, when you finish your education here, he was from New Jersey. You'll come on back, find me in New York, and let's do some work together. So he did. A year later, he showed up, and we did some gigs together. was he and I, Tony Scott, and a bass player and a drummer. Anyway, we had in the apartment. We had one of those little beat up upright pianos, and he was playing on that. And I had been, in the meantime, I was recording for Riverside Records. So I called up Bill and I said, Bill, no, I called up Orrin Keepnews.
Right.
And I said, Orrin, there's a guy you really need to hear. He's a piano player. He says, Monday I'm up to my ass in piano players. He says, I've got Monk and I've got this and I've got that. And I said, but you need to hear this guy, babe. And he says, okay. He said, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to record. I had a little Webcore recorder. In those days, you recorded on thread, on metal thread.
Absolutely.
Not tape. So I had Bill play a couple of things, and I took that little machine and went over to Riverside Records, and I got Orrin in the corner, and I said, you got to listen to this guy. And he listened to him for a while. And he says, Monday, he says, I got piano players. I said, listen to this guy, Orrin. He's got it. So a little time went on, and Orrin called up Bill. Bill went up for a meeting with him, and they worked out a deal.
My final question for you for our segment today, Mundell, is for aspiring younger musicians who maybe are dedicated and locked into the academia part of it. What would be your advice to them insofar as what they could do in order to enhance their own musical sound and become more comfortable with themselves as a musician?
What they need to do is they need to get a teacher who knows what he's doing and really do what he tells them to, and then sit with that thing in their lap hour after hour after hour. Then their sound and their approach to music will come into focus. That's the only way you can do it. You cannot say, well, today I'm going to play like Les Paul, and tomorrow I'm going to play like Tal Farlow. It doesn't happen that way. You sit with whatever you're playing, and you play it, and take the goddamn phone off the hook, and just concentrate on what you're doing until you get that sound inside your soul. Then you're on your way.
Mundell Lowe, a living legend, continued success, and if we don't talk before your trip to Europe, I hope it's a successful one, my friend.
Jake, thanks for the words and the conversation. I enjoyed it.
Take care, my friend.
Goodbye.
Bye.